This is part 11 in my guide to the mechanical raid team, and this time around I'll be looking at the fight against the Rogal Dorn tank. Not much to say to introduce myself, as I already spent 45 minutes doing that in the preliminaries, so I'm just going to jump into this fairly quickly. Before I start, I think I'll just flag up that, as usual, here I'll be trying to get as many summons out as soon as possible. So I have Tan on the left over here, ready to shoot this guardsman once I get started. I could potentially have Shosil here, moving forward 2 hexes and get him to shoot this guardsman to get his sniper drone spawned in, but every time I've tried to get Tan to spawn a Crescendo on one side and a sniper drone to get spawned on the other, it's never really worked out the way I've wanted it to. It's been a bit awkward with manoeuvring, and the advantage of spawning the summon early has been negated by them being killed quite quickly. So it's not to say that I've figured out the best way of doing this, but maybe there's a way of starting to get sniper drones spawned a little sooner than I do, but as far as this goes, this is about the best I've been able to figure out so far. So instead I'll use Row to get the overkill on that guardsman and have potential to make this mortar team flee. I want the mortar team to be done away with, if possible, so the fact that it didn't flee is kind of annoying, but it can be handled very easily. The main thing I want to avoid from this mortar team is it debuffing Row with suppression, because I would prefer him to have his full movement stat available in the next turn, because it will allow him to hit the rear armour of the tank. So just for now, I know the tank's going to be moving down the map, so I don't need to move Shosil forward really. And if I did move him forward, that would potentially give the tank someone to run over if it continued moving to the south. I don't want to entice it to come down to the south, I want it to go to the southeast instead. So if the tank moves into this position, and there's anything here where it could move into in the turn afterwards, that's how it decides whether there's anything for it to run over when it's deciding which way to turn. So currently the only thing it can run over is Tan, and I want it to be facing in the southeastern direction, so I need to start stacking this area with characters and potentially a summon as well to entice the tank to face and travel in this direction, which means moving Eldrion and Actus there. There was a time when I would put Actus, I think, here, but in the next turn I need to be moving Actus over to this hex, so if he gets hit by the splash damage from the mortar, he can't move from here over to there due to suppression. So that's why I've put him here. So if the tank faces to the southeast, it will now be able to run over Actus and Eldrion in the turn after that. So now that's stacked the deck sufficiently in favour of the tank facing to the southeast that it will do that. I've put Spore Mine there to take the suppression from the mortar. Doesn't really matter if Eldrion gets suppressed. That can be handled just fine. Again, I just want to avoid Row from being suppressed. And unfortunately here the turn order is against you, so the guardsmen act before the mortar. If the mortar acted first, I could probably just put the Spore Mine, I don't know, over here somewhere more out of the way, so that I don't have to risk my characters being hit by the splash from the mortar and being suppressed. But because the mortar acts after the guardsman, I can't place it too near to the enemy lines, because the guardsman will attack and kill the Spore Mine before the mortar has a chance to, so the mortar will instead shoot one of my characters. So I'd rather at least have a chance of my characters not being suppressed, and that's what happened here, so at least that turned out alright. So now I'm moving Row into position, and I've scored 1 crit against the tank, so 1 more crit will disable the Overwatch, but I don't really want the Overwatch to be disabled just yet. And the reason for this is that this Guitarist is over here, and left to his own devices he'll kill this guardsman and the mortar team. But I want the guardsman and mortar team to be over in this area of the map when the Guitarist gets around to killing them, or at least one of them anyway, the last one alive, to be around here. And that's just due to the movement of the tank and how if you kill this guardsman and this mortar team, the Skitaris will run up behind the tank and start shooting at it, and then when the tank turns around later on, the Skitaris will be run over. And I mentioned in my preliminaries the sort of crescendo thing that I like to think of, where you're building up and up to a big round where you're doing the lion's share of your damage. And again, if the Skitaris is just allowed to kind of chase after the tank rather than after these adds, it'll be killed just before the big crescendo turn, where I'm doing a lot of damage. So I want to maximize my damage output on that particular turn, which means keeping the Skitaris out of the way and out of trouble until he can contribute there. So I'm just going to ignore this guardsman. I'm going to ignore the mortar for now as well. And also to draw the guardsman over to this area of the map, what I'm going to do is trigger the Overwatch a couple of times to get Eldryon nice and injured, so that instead of going for a Skitarius, which he might otherwise do, the guardsman will attack Eldryon due to his diminished health from taking a couple of hits from the tank's Overwatch. Now, my reason for putting Actus here is very specific. So, as I always like to mention, Tan has his deployment rules where he will deploy a Skitarius, all other things being equal, at the 12 o'clock position to him, i.e. where Actus is right now, and then he'll spawn any further ones going clockwise from there. And I don't want a Skitarius spawned into the position where Actus is. The reason for this is that the tank will be moving into this area in the next turn. So if a Skitarius was spawned here, it would be at 2 range from the tank, so it would, at the start of the next turn, simply shoot at the tank, and I don't want that to happen because also at the start of the next turn, the tank will have shot at Tan and initiated the Pound Them to Dust ability. So Tan and all the hexes surrounding him will be about to be hit by extremely heavy round damage. So if the Skitarius is just here standing still, then it won't move out of the way of that ability and it will probably die, which I definitely don't want to have happen. However, if I have the Skitarius spawned here, then it will be in melee with the tank after it moves, and so the Skitarius will be, because it likes to maximize its damage output, it will move out of melee of the tank, and also it won't move into the area that has been marked by Pound Them to Dust, because it sees that as a danger area, I think is how that works. So it will move over here or here or here to shoot at the tank. So there we go, I've taken a couple of hits on Eldryon, lost maybe 20% of his health there to make him a nice juicy target. And I want this mortar team alive to bait the Skitarius over, so I'm not going to attack it with Eldryon. I've just got Eldryon here to doom the tank, not only in this turn, but also after it moves as well. Now, Tan, if I attack with him again, he's going to spawn his next Skitarius here, and again, you'll run into the problem of him spawning it in a way where it will simply want to stand still and attack the tank in the next round, whereas I want it to move off so it doesn't move off to here or wherever, so it doesn't get killed by the Pound Them to Dust ability. So what I'll do now is move Shosil into that position to stop the Skitarius from being spawned there, so that it is instead spawned here, where it can't attack the tank without moving, so it will be enticed again to move over into this area to attack the tank in the next round. And now I'm just free to attack with Shosil. And the spore mine's placed here to try and bait the guardsman over to attack it. So the guardsman can move on to this hex and attack the spore mine, which will keep the Skitarius occupied of trying to kill him. So as you can see, the Skitari have moved off, so they're no longer in the danger zone, and the only things that remain in the danger zone are my characters. And of course I'm able to move my characters at will, so that's not a problem. So again, I want to keep the mortar team alive, but I don't want them to be using I don't want it to be using its attack too much and suppressing my units. And I also want to start building up spore mines in this area of the map, because later on in the battle, I want the tank will be coming back to this space, and it will have a choice of either going this way or going up to the north along this path. And I want it to go up to the north, so a way of enticing it to go that way is to start filling this area of the map with my units, to give it more targets to hit with gunner's kill on sight, or to potentially run over as well, which will make it favour proceeding in this direction as opposed to proceeding in this direction. And also the spore mines stop the mortar from using its ranged attack, which I'm perfectly happy with. Which means no more suppression, of course. So naturally moved Row into position first, so I can start capitalising on his passive ability, hitting the tank in the rear armour to get that extra critical hit chance. Now, a good thing about having Tan here is that I have 2 spaces to spawn Skitari into, which will make up my whole complement of 5 Skitari that I'm out to have at once. And due to their position here, they're nicely tucked out of the way, so they won't have any danger of being run over by the tank at any point now. So that's one thing you want to think about, is making sure your Skitari are as safe as they relatively can be, whilst still being able to be of use to your characters, of course, in terms of getting those extra activations from Conqueror mode, etc. Let's get Skitari spawned. Now Shosil, obviously I don't want him to be there because he'd be hit by the tank, but also now when he spawns the drone, when he attacks, he'll spawn it into... Well, he doesn't have any adjacent hexes, so the next closest hex to him is one of these 3. And preferentially he will not spawn it, I think, into the danger zone of this ability, so he'll spawn it onto the barbed wire. So now I'm able to have 2 sniper drones out, and neither of them are in danger of being killed. And here, I wasn't going to attack the mortar team with Eldrion. Again, I want to keep it alive to keep the Skitaris distracted. And instead I move Eldrion into an area where he can get the 50% bonus crit chance from the weaker rear armour. Just to have a chance to do a little extra damage. The tank will be staying in place in the next turn, so I don't need to worry about it moving out of doom range. Unfortunately, a lot of my spore mines got killed there, but one of them survived, which might entice the tank to face to the north in the next round. But now is the time. The turn after this will be when I want to do a lot of damage, which means having Row hitting the rear armour of the tank. So to do that, I can either have Row here or here and get the tank to face north, so that its rear armour is here and Row can then hit it, or I want to have Row either here or here and have the tank facing southwest, so that its rear armour is here or here and Row can hit it in the next turn from there. So, and obviously at the start of the next turn when all my summons are attacking, I want Row's active ability to be online to make the most of that. So I'm going to be using Row's active ability now, so that it's ready to go when he's hitting the rear armour at the start of the next turn when all of my summons are attacking. Now previously what I used to do was I would move Row into this hex to use his active ability to keep him out of the way of the Armoured Might ability of the tank. But now I understand the battle a bit better. I know that Ro, when he gets hit by this ability, he's going to be pushed into this hex. So when he's pushed into this hex, the tank will face to the north, and he'll still be able to hit the rear armor from here. But the key difference between putting Ro here and putting him here is that in the turn after that, I'll then be able to move Ro from the hex I currently have selected around to the front of the tank, so that when the tank moves again and it moves into this position, Ro will be displaced from here as it moves onto this hex, which means that he'll be able to attack the tank at the beginning of the next turn again when all of my summons are attacking it to get a bit of extra damage. If I put Ro here, the tank would move into this area. It wouldn't push Ro. Ro would just keep standing here. He'd get the rear armor hits against it, but he wouldn't be able to move around to the front of the tank. So the furthest he'd be able to get is either the hex I have selected here or the hex I have selected here. And because the tank is moving into this area, he wouldn't be able to hit it at the start of the next turn. So I think that represented a slight diminishment in the damage that I could have potentially been able to deal when I was using that strategy, which is why I changed it up. One thing I think I'd do differently next time was, so Gunner's Kill on Sight was still active at the start of this turn and covering this area here. I think what maybe I should have done is move Shosil onto this hex and shot at the tank. Because when the Gunner's Kill on Sight is active, Shosil doesn't like to spawn his drones into the area it's covering, so he probably would have spawned his drone either here or here. Which means that when the tank's moving up into this area, there wouldn't have been any targets for it to run over except for Ro. And because I'm going to be putting a spore mine up here, as well as having Eldrion and the Skitaris here, that gives the tank 3 targets to run over in the next turn, as opposed to 1 going in this direction. So putting Shosil here, rather than keeping him in his current position, I think that might be slightly dangerous. I mentioned before that the rule of thumb was that the tank will try, all other things being equal, to follow to turn in the direction that allows it to run over enemies in the next turn. Given a choice between a direction that has enemies to run over and one that has none, the tank will almost always face in the direction that has enemies to run over. However, it is on this very map, in this exact situation, where that rule of thumb was broken. The only time I've ever seen it be broken. I had Eldrion, a spore mine, and a Skitaris up here, and literally nothing for the tank to run over this way. And the tank still, at the end of my turn here, decided to face to the southwest and move in that direction anyway. And I think the reason for that was that because I had Shosil in this area, and that gave it a lot of targets to cover with Gunner's Kill on Sight. If you think of the tank facing to the southwest here, Gunner's Kill on Sight would be covering the entirety of this sort of area. So if I had Shosil here, I'd have another sniper drone, I'd have this sniper drone, this one, this Skitaris, and Ro in the area covered by Gunner's Kill on Sight. And I think just the sheer number of targets that the tank had available to it was what caused it to turn in that direction. And that was when I was using the strategy where I had Ro standing here, as opposed so that he stayed in this position, as opposed to being pushed into this position. So with what I'm currently doing, what would happen is the tank would actually have a character, Ro, here that it could run over by moving to the southwest. So I think on the balance of things, I think it's very risky to put any more units in this area, because I think there's already not much of an incentive for it to go to the north in terms of things to run over, 3 targets as opposed to 1. But then giving it that many targets to hit with Gunner's Kill on Sight, I think would just tip the balance in favour of the tank moving to the southwest. And I didn't really want to roll the dice on trying to predict whether the tank would go to the southwest or the north after moving into this position after this turn. I think I'll be facing this boss battle again in this guild season, so next time around I might move Shosil into this position instead of keeping him where he is, and see which way the tank decides to face. But currently with this replay, I didn't take the risk of the tank potentially facing in a direction I didn't want it to face in, so it's just why I won't be moving Sho. Yeah, just switch over to Conqueror mode now, of course. And I've got all my Skitari arranged in a lovely way to get 3 extra hits out of them. 3 extra attacks, rather. And there we go, Shosil, not moving him. Also, if I did move him to this position now and attack with him, because the barbed wire, his AI sees it as being dangerous, I think what he'd potentially do is spawn his sniper drone either here or here, which might further incentivize the tank to move to the southwest, instead of if the sniper drone was here or here. So yeah, I think it's very iffy potentially moving Shosil over this way, but there would be a good reason for it, which will become apparent later. But for now, just going to let this play out. So preemptively moving Eldryon away so that he can doom the tank once it finishes its move, because everyone's done attacking. And now see the importance of this Guitarist being alive. He's attacked the tank whilst Ro is behind it, and has his active online, so getting lots of extra damage out of Ro for each additional hit that is scored against the tank in this turn. So now Shosil, with the way that he deploys his drones, I know he's got a choice between deploying a drone either here or here. I want him to spawn the drone here so that when I move Tan into this position, Tan can activate 3 summons with Conqueror mode. So I'm going to ensure that the drones spawn there by putting a spore mine here. Make sure I attack with Shosil before doing anything else, so that Tan has the maximum number of summons available to activate with Conqueror mode. And I've used Actus's active as well to get 2 additional hits on top of what I'd get if he just used his heal on Tan, to again further just squeeze as much damage out of this round as possible. Each one of those hits that Ro is dealing against the tank is very hefty. So now I've got no more mechanical summons left to trigger, so I'm moving Ro in front of the tank so that he gets hit by it and displaced into this hex once it moves, so that he will be in contact with the tank at the start of the next turn. And get his final hit in, because I'm moving Eldryon to a place where he'll no longer be dooming the tank, but he will be dooming it in the next turn. And the reason I've moved Eldryon over to this side of the map is that I have a lot of Skitari over here on the right hand side of the map. So once the tank moves up into this position, the Skitari are going to want to sort of cluster around here, which will screen, and of course they'll move before I can move any of my characters, so that will screen Eldryon from being able to attack the boss, potentially from behind to make use of the weaker rear armor bonus. Also, potentially if I left him here to doom the boss, this Guitarist would have to move into this hex instead of moving into the trench, which would then force this Guitarist to move onto this hex, which would then force this it'll be a domino effect of Skitari not being able to move up as far as they potentially may be able to otherwise, which will lead to one of the Skitari not actually being able to attack the tank at the start of the next turn, just because they kind of block each other. So they're already quite prone to blocking each other, and I don't want to make that situation any worse by cluttering the area with Eldryon being there as well. So I'm just getting Eldryon right out of the way to not block the area and get extra damage from hitting the rear of the tank. I got quite unlucky here with Ro not really scoring any crits apart from here. So he didn't do a great deal of damage, but I think with a bit of better luck, you could get some decent damage out of him being in that position. Now we see the problem of me not having moved Shosil into this position earlier. He is completely blocked from doing anything to the tank at this point, so this round he can do nothing at all. Even if he used his active, it wouldn't have time to actually damage the tank before the battle ends. So if I had Shosil in this position around earlier, I could move him up more easily to get up in the tank's business. Not only that, but we're in a sort of awkward situation here where Tan can't move anywhere where he's able to activate more than 2 summons with Conqueror mode. So if I had Shosil here, for example, I could move him onto this hex, and then maybe with a bit of spore mine jiggery pokery, force him to spawn a sniper drone here, which Tan could then be able to activate with Conqueror mode. So by not having Shosil moved up, I'm missing out on Shosil's damage, I'm missing out on the trigger of Ro's passive that I'd get with Shosil attacking, and then I'm also missing out on the damage of the drone twice again. That would be triggered by Tan, and 2 extra hits of Ro on top of that as well, from the drone being triggered twice. So there is quite a big payoff to potentially moving Sho up quicker, sooner, and I may try that in my next run, and I think that would be able to get me over the 700k damage mark on this particular map. But as it stands, I don't quite reach that. I get close. I think it could be done with this setup, but that's an experiment for another day, I think. Anyway, my guild has beaten this boss now, so I can't really check. At least not until we get around to it again. So that was that, 680,000 damage, not too bad. Again, I think potentially could be better, but that requires a bit of experimentation. I think, though, that is all that needs to be said here, so I'm going to leave it at that.